This is Jason Canigan, the host of the Cold Star Project, and this is quite a fascinating episode today. One that, wow, I've been waiting a few months to be able to do this. I met Steve kind of virtually, I guess, through LinkedIn after running into some of his videos, his training videos about the hospital department that he trains people to work in, among other things that he does. And I've been pursuing this as a business opportunity, like to go in there and work on their processes and that for a while. And I have an on again, off again kind of relationship with it. I've toured sterile processing departments in hospitals and been taken around, and hey, this is how we do it. But man, there was just so much I didn't know, and it's not about the instruments or the sterilization techniques or anything like that. It's not an equipment-based thing, and you'll hear it today. I was startled by some of the stuff that my guest talks about, because even having been around it for this long, and my mother worked in the hospital in North Vancouver for many years, and worked in this department there. Even with all that, I was still really surprised by the things that Steve talked about today. And they're not equipment issues or knowledge issues, they are culture issues. And it began instantly as soon as we got done doing the podcast recording. I let Steve know, look, this has really got me wondering what other industries is a situation, a cultural issue like this going on in. And it's fascinating to have a guest on who can speak their mind. It really is. Like most of the guests that I have on, they're great people, of course, and I love them and appreciate them having them on, but they have to have an agenda. They probably can't fully speak their mind unless they're a completely independent consultant. And even then, you still want to get customers or clients, right? So you're going to say nice stuff about them, right? But Steve here is in a position where he is able to share the truth, which is, remember, Cold Star Tech's highest value, so I appreciate it the most. This is a big deal about what's going on. And all the technical knowledge in the world will not fix what's going on here. So come on in and join us. Steve, he's a busy guy, so he joined us from his car. The video is not amazing, but the insights and the window into this world and the identification of these specific culture issues. I mean, I'm going back over this thing, and I'm pulling out notes for me in my business about what to look for and what I could maybe do about something like this if I encounter it in other industries and that. So I really appreciate our guest today. Let's join. It's time for another episode of the Cold Star Project, the podcast about the unexpected challenges of scaling businesses. And I'm with Steve Yanovsky, who is, well, he's a nurse for one. Got a bunch of things from your LinkedIn profile there. But most importantly for me, even though you're involved in some dental stuff and that, you're the director of education at the Boston Career Institute and a partner there, which is very cool. And I found out about this thing called sterile processing some years ago. And my mother worked in a hospital. And what that is, well, Steve, why don't you explain what sterile processing is for us and why it's important?
Well, sterile processing is perhaps the most important profession in the hospital next to surgery. Nowadays, surgery is probably one of the few things that brings in significant revenue to the hospital. And sterile processing field or sterile processing technicians are the people who provide surgical instruments, sterile surgical instruments, and disposable supplies to surgery in real time. So that's basically what sterile processing is. In a nutshell.
All right. So the reason I wanted to have you on is that sterile processing department matches up exactly with the three things that I really like working on in business. First of all, a compliance culture. If you get this wrong, somebody's going to get hurt, or disease is going to spread or something, right? If it's not fully sterilized. And I learned the difference between
That's correct.
Cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilizing are not the same thing. That's one thing that I've learned from you. Watched quite a few of your videos on YouTube there, and also a time-based critical mission where basically the dirty instruments come down to the basement of the hospital from the operating room, and they need to be cleaned and sterilized and set up for the next day's operations into various trays and that. So that is a time-based critical mission, and there's a whole process that goes on with it, which I've been very interested in for the past year or so. Learning to talk this language and that, and also the desire to be the best, which is not always present, but in hospitals, it's usually part of the program. So our next question then is about the healthcare field. I got this quote from the Bureau of Labor Statistics here about healthcare occupations. They say that the employment of healthcare occupations is projected to grow 14% from 2018 to 2028, much faster than the average for all occupations. And that's going to add about 1.9 million new jobs. And this projected growth is mainly due to an aging population leading to greater demand for healthcare services. So, given that the healthcare field is projected to grow like that, how is this growth rate reflected in the need for sterile processing techs, and what do they need to know to be employable?
Of course, the aging population will contribute, of course, to the rise in the employment in the healthcare field. That goes without saying. The aging population does suffer more from various maladies, and it will need to be treated. And of course, a lot of their problems are being solved right now surgically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's probably going to be several sectors which are benefiting from it. Would be the home care and of course sterile processing. Now, sterile processing right now is a field that's in most states, probably 48 out of 50 states, is completely and totally unregulated. And
Mm-hmm.
all certifying agencies for sterile processing are pushing legislation in every state to try to get people certified. The hospitals, of course, on one hand, they're looking for people to be certified. On the other hand, they're deathly afraid of the adaptation of various laws in every state, because they're probably going to, at this point in time, will lose 70% of their workforce due to the fact that a lot of people cannot get certified.
Ah.
They have tried to become certified, but they can't, because that sort of goes against the culture that they're accustomed to in that particular field. Sterile processing in many ways has been an afterthought for various hospitals, and have remained in a basement where they were conceived, next to the kitchen, next to the morgue, and where the operating rooms used to be. And even though operating rooms have migrated upwards and became state of the art, sterile processing is still somewhat of an afterthought. So the need for certified sterile processing technicians is going to be absolutely huge, and it's going to be, unless handled properly, is going to be a disaster for hospitals.
Hmm.
Sorry, I'm sort of veering off the subject a little bit, but
Cool.
to get back to what you were asking, uh, the need is going to be great, and it's probably going to be greater than what we're discussing, only because once the legislation is passed, all these people who cannot become certified, whether they're afraid of certification or they simply cannot be retrained to current standard, um, those positions will need to be filled, and they will need to be filled very quickly.
Okay. You've brought up something that I have not actually heard of before, which is this cultural thing. That I was going to wait and see if our video can come back.
I'm here. I'm
Yeah.
just putting my ear closer to the speaker because something happened to my speaker, and I can only hear it on the phone. So if you're asking a
Okay.
question,
All
if you
right.
don't mind, I'll just listen
Sure.
in quickly.
Okay. And our viewers can participate. Okay. So this culture thing that you just mentioned, that is something new to me that I haven't run into before, and that's very interesting. So there is a desire not to have certification because they're afraid that they'll lose the workforce that they have, and yet, your organization does certify techs, and I know that in the town that I've been in the last 9 years, they require certification as well. Well, maybe not require, but it sure helps to get a sterile processing job in there. So,
Well, if I may, let me
yeah,
sort of jump in and kind of address what
sure.
you're saying over there. The situation is this way: the hospitals do understand that there's a great need for certified technicians, only because there's a desperate need to follow protocol.
Hmm.
The certification process for sterile processing technicians is much like for any other profession. At the end of the day, no one wants to kill anyone. So, for example, if you take nursing boards, It's the fact that if you're a young, inexperienced nurse, you don't want to kill anyone. And that's what this test is. It's a preventive test to see, are you going to kill someone or you're not going to kill someone? In
Right.
sterile processing, it's the same thing. It's what you said in the beginning. It's the culture of compliance that's being inserted into the field without any compliance.
Hmm.
Okay. I don't even know how else to put it. So, all of a sudden they're asking people about, um, what does OSHA say about the personal protective equipment? Or how far should a shelf be away from an outside wall?
Hmm.
Why is it that you cannot put a storage bin underneath a pipe? Why can't you, put in shelving units next to a sprinkler head? Okay, so what does it have to do with sterilization? Well, it has nothing to do with sterilization, and yet it has everything to do with sterilization, or sterile processing rather, because when CMS comes in for an inspection, or the Joint Commission comes in, all these retired nurses with clipboards are going to show up and they're going to ask you all these wonderful questions.
Hmm.
How come you didn't? How come there's no log next to the eye wash station? And how come the eye wash station is not 10 seconds away from site of potential injury? And this is what most people in sterile processing fail to grasp. Okay, that sterile processing is bigger, much
Hmm.
bigger than assembly of instruments. It's much bigger than sterilizing in steam or hydrogen peroxide or ethylene oxide. It's indeed the compliance aspect of it all, because we're dealing with surgery, a major invasive procedure with an immune compromised patient. And if you don't do your job right, you are, well, I don't want to use the term guilty of professional negligence,
Hmm.
which is now medical malpractice. Okay. Why is the patient sick after the procedure? Is it a break in surgical protocol, or is it the fact that somebody didn't sterilize the lumen in an instrument? Okay. So that's where the problem is. And this is why the hospitals are scared to death.
Hmm.
It's hard to get, people to work in a hospital today to begin with. I mean, what is the latest figures for unemployment? These are pretty low numbers nowadays. So where do you get skilled people to work in sterile processing? Hard to get. Once you get somebody decent, how do you get them certified? It's hard enough to get somebody to assemble a kit or to sterilize
Hmm.
something. How do you get them to become certified? So this is where the problem is. On one hand, they know that somebody who's reprocessing an endoscope needs to know what they're doing. They need
Hmm.
to know so people don't get sick. On the same token, where are they going to find qualified staff members? And the equipment today is not entirely idiot proof. There's still a lot left to the discretion of the sterile processing technician, supervisor, manager, and so on and so forth. So, because the process is not automated and still relies on the boots on the ground, so to speak, uh, we have a problem. I mean, I kind of hope it makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, that illuminates it quite a bit. And for folks who don't know, as soon as you get dampness and darkness and a little bit of warmth going, you're going to start getting bacteria and growth and things like that. So
That's right.
it's
That's
very
right.
dangerous.
And people need to
Um,
understand what the humidity levels ought to be. And
yeah.
that's the compliance culture that people are simply not familiar with.
Hmm. So again, this is a bigger world than just please recognize the silhouettes of these instruments, or hopefully what they do, and assemble them in the right way. Uh,
Exactly.
I mean, a doctor can say, look, I want this particular instrument included in the kit, and I want it wrapped in a particular kind of material, and not just what you want. And if they don't get what they want, these doctors will come down to the sterile processing department and really lay into the staff. They will,
Well, yes, it's all
yeah,
true. And the
yeah.
doctor has the discretion and the right to do whatever they want. Heck,
Mhm.
the doctor has the right and the ability to request an completely unsterile kit to come to surgery. But the staff needs to know that for that, they need an early release protocol,
Hmm.
and the doctor needs to sign a paper. And again, coming back to the compliance issue, where's the compliance? The doctor can browbeat a sterile processing technician into submission any day of the week, because in a hospital, doctor is God. Sorry, God. But the fact of the matter is, in the hospital, that's where it's at. But the sterile processing technician, if they have no clue how they need to comply with the physician's request, you know, you're supposed to do things if they're legal, moral, and ethical. The doctor cannot ask you to do any of that
Hmm.
unless they sign a specific piece of paper. That needs to be included in policies, procedures, and protocols of the department. And more importantly, each sterile processing technician needs to know what that piece of paper is and what to do. Okay, because I've seen physicians fly down from surgery into sterile processing and almost physically assault the sterile processing technicians. Doctors don't necessarily understand that there's a process to everything, but to them, there is a patient who's under sedation, who is, by all intents and purposes, dead on the table if they don't have what they need. So they can request whatever they want, and it's their discretion. But the sterile processing technician needs to understand where the proper paperwork is, if it exists at all, and what do we do from here on in. Compliance.
Fascinating. Just a very, very different world than you might expect. So how are you ensuring that needed skills and requirements are met in your training programs at the Institute?
Well, luckily, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have certifying agencies that provide, a full package of information that has to be taught in order that the people pass their board examination. I mean, they created for example, AAMI, which is the governing body that regulates sterile processing.
Hmm.
Their manual for sterile processing is only 160 pages. IHCSMM's manual is about 550 pages of information. So they've expanded what AAMI had said and expounded on the basic information that was provided. See, AAMA provides a very compact code for what it needs to be, but it's not attainable to most people in the field. So ISHM, for example, and the CBSBD, they came up with training materials which sort of meet AAMI halfway and provide the information. So I don't have to reinvent the wheel. All I have to do is provide the training in such a way that people are well accustomed to the needs of being a sterile processing technician today.
Okay, fantastic. So I have seen that there is, once you start getting some of these certifications, you can get other certifications and grow. So you come into the hospital through the sterile processing tech role, and then maybe you can move up. What other certifications can people achieve once they've gotten in and have 2, 3, 4 years experience with this?
Okay, well, this is a relatively new phenomenon
Hmm.
for both certifying agencies. The IAH, CSMM, and CBSBD have rolled out certification in the areas of extreme need. The first one that came out, uh, really, that makes any sense is endoscope reprocessing certification. It used to be covered under the umbrella of general certification. Right now, they made it a separate certification. They also have certification for instrument technicians. That's just whatever. Without undermining what it is that they want
Hmm.
to do with it, is just another layer. And of course, there's the leadership aspect of it all. That's extra compliance and human communication stuff that would be necessary to become an effective supervisor and a manager in the field. Something that you're usually taught in continuing education courses with every employer if they want to invest you into their management team. For example, McDonald's and Walmart, they've had for years these training programs for effective management. You can make a pretty good career with that. So I think they're shooting for that as well in sterile processing. But the one that makes the most sense would be the endoscope, because that's that other untouched field, where people going in there are deathly afraid of endoscopes. Why, I don't know,
Hmm.
but it's the fear, of the unknown and the complex equipment that it is. But at the end of the day, if you understand the basics of it all and the compliance aspect of it all, you're going to get through it without any issues whatsoever. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I've also seen opportunities for people to move up and become an OR tech and start actually sitting in on real surgeries and seeing what's happening live in there. Now, given what you've said about the different levels of training and whatnot, what kind of issues are there in growing a sterile processing team where you've got skill sets at different levels maybe, brought into one organization, and then you want to add on more in that. How do you keep them all at the same level of skill, or raise them up as you go? Or is it just, well, we'll just take it as we can? And
I I mentioned in the beginning that
yeah.
sterile processing department has always been an afterthought. On the same token, managers of the sterile processing departments and the directors of perioperative services are only now beginning to wake up to the fact that a clinical educator in these departments is a key role.
Okay.
And not only is it a clinical educator who is an educator from some other field, it needs to be a clinical educator in the field of sterile processing, its own educator. Um, Usually what they do is they stuff an OR nurse into sterile processing
Mm-hmm.
department with that nurse's warped view of sterile processing,
Mm-hmm.
and those folks can't connect with uh, the down in the trench mentality in the sterile processing department. It's the elitist mentality of the OR that doesn't work well with a blue collar, if you will, aspect of sterile processing. So there's this, tug of war that takes place within the department, and of course, people who've done this job for 20 plus years or 10 plus years, whatever, they're not going to be talked down or talked down to in that particular field, because most cases they know this particular aspect of the job much better than anyone else. But the compliance aspect of it all, not the actual work, but the actual why we do the work and why we do certain things the way we do them, that part is missing. And those folks have a chronic, if you will, inferiority complex that's very, very difficult to overcome. That has been my biggest challenge in people who have been in departments for a while. I can take a person who has no knowledge of anything and train them to pass the board exam in 2 to 3 weeks. It may take me 6 months to take a person who knows the job inside and out, knows it better than I do, as a matter of fact, but they cannot come off of the Olympus there, from the top of Olympus, to say, okay, teach me, let me open my mind and let me do what you do. And so I can do what I do better. Uh, One thing that I always tell my students is that the most important thing that they will do is to, well, keep their mouth shut and listen more. And most importantly, is to learn as much as they can once they pass the board exam, to become visible in the operating room, to ask for and receive permission to go and observe the surgery, to become a part of the perioperative team, to be able to be recognized as a professional that they are, with a certification that's national and, as a matter of fact, international. And once they become a member of the team and not just someone in the basement who used to swing a mop and is now just washing the instruments. No, no, no. It's to develop the culture of professionalism, which only comes with belonging to a professional organization, having licensure, and having, direct relationship to the patient. You know, the Food and Drug Administration um, classifies sterile processing equipment as Class 2 medical device. Okay, why do they do that? Because there is a risk of, or possibility of a risk of injury to the patient if the equipment malfunctions. Now, if the FDA classifies equipment, how should we classify a person who operates the equipment and does that? So there is a direct connection from a sterile processing technician to the actual patient care. And that part is missing in the culture of sterile processing. Just because people work in the basement somewhere and they run the equipment and they deal with a piece of instrument, they need to feel that there's a long arm of the sterile processing technician that stretches from the basement directly to the operating room table. Okay, and sterile processing field is an excellent field. There are so many ways you can expand your knowledge and be useful in the hospital. People don't even understand how far a person like that can go. We are now standing on a precipice where sterile processing can take off probably to the same level as nursing. Nurses used to be, the bottom of the food chain. Remember, it was only prostitutes and nuns that used to enter that field many, many years ago, right? How far along have we come? Now you can get a doctorate in nursing, and I don't know how much people make in different parts of the country, but if you have a master's degree in Boston, you're making over $150,000 a year up to upwards of $250,000 a year if you're a nurse anesthetist. I mean, that is a staggering amount of money for a registered nurse. And now let's apply that to sterile processing, where a median wage in the United States just a few years ago was just over $24,000 a year. You know, so, and it's, to me, that was just extraordinary. I couldn't understand that. But now you look around in Boston, for example, it almost doubled, and it's going to go through that phase again, but only if people realize that level of compliance, that level of professionalism, esprit de corps, that they must experience and apply to their profession. It has to come from within.
Amazing. I love the vision. I love the vision of the future there that you've shared, Steve, and the window into the culture of what's really going on there. Just as a final question, is there any talking point or belief that you wish that the public had or that business people had about sterile processing that they just don't have right now?
It's an interesting question.
Mm.
I don't know about the public, because the public is public doesn't really understand what doctors do.
Mm.
They are so far removed. A lot of the public is just that, it's public. They're ignorant to what they do. My vision would be more to hospital administrators and OR
Mm-hmm.
administrators to finally start treating sterile processing not as an afterthought, but as the primary thought when they even design their operating room protocols and procedures and so on and so forth. That would be my goal, for people to treat this as a first and primary thought, because if you develop that, then the surgical services will run smoothly. There's really no need to have any kind of stress in this particular field. If everything is planned out properly, if they just take a lesson from UPS, where
Mm.
nothing goes wrong, everything is tracked, everything is scanned, you know, in real time where your package is, and so on. And then everybody gets their stuff on time and not an issue. Well, that's the story here. Let me share with you a quick story that I won't mention who. I was being interviewed for a position of a manager in the department, and I was being interviewed at the time by a director of. He was a medical director of surgery. He was the chief of surgery, and he goes on and on and on. Says, "Hey, Steve, you know, you have your work cut out for you. All these people are idiots working in the department. You know, they do awful work. You know, just," and he was so down on sterile processing technicians. And I really didn't need the job, so I could say whatever I wanted. It was just one of those things that I did. So I'm asking him, have you ever been to the sterile processing department? He says, no, I haven't. Okay. So I asked him, doctor, have you ever flown on an airplane? And he says, of course I have. Well, would you ever go on a plane where a pilot didn't do a pre-flight check, didn't kick the tires, so to speak, didn't talk to the maintenance people about the bird he's about to fly? He says, no, I wouldn't feel comfortable. I said, well, you're the pilot, doctor. And he looks at me with these, you know, deer in the headlights eyes. And I look at him and I said, well, who's the real idiot here, doctor? And he picked up his phone and he texted. He said, hire that man. And but the fact of the matter is, this is a culture in the OR. It's a culture in the hospital. It's the fact is that the doctors with their I don't know, they go to school for so long. They have so many residency programs, they have fellowships. And then they go on and they put their licenses, their careers, the lives of their patients in the hands of who? People they call idiots? There seems to be a disconnect. There seems to be a problem. People need to be brought up to a level of a healthcare professional, and people need to be compensated properly for their service, and people need to be held to a higher standard. And only then are we going to accomplish great results in sterile processing, and, you know, where people feel like a part of the team and lifesavers.
Well, fantastic, and thank you very much for this window into that world. You've startled me a few times because you've shared things that, even though I've been interested in this field directly for seriously for many years, but really for a year or more of real scrutiny, you've surprised me with things that you've shared that I just didn't know about because I'm not in it every day. I've been on tours of sterile processing departments and in hospitals and that. But, you know, to get this kind of an insider viewpoint is really, really valuable. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad I was there to assist, and good luck.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve.
All the best to you.
Thank you.